The Spill Sports Show. Matt Reynoldson.
I've always been told I have the face for radio, and now I'm making it happen.
David Eickholt.
It's utter blasphemy. It blows my mind.
Scott Ayers.
The next time they make the playoffs, I'll be running for president.
Spend your Thursday drive time with the Spill Sports Show. Every week from 3 to 5 on KRNU.
Woo! Bring 'em out, bring 'em out, bring 'em out, bring 'em out. It's hard to yell when the barrel's in your mouth. Come on.
You're listening to the Spill Sports Show on KRNU.
Just gotta do what I gotta do, and when I gotta do it, you know. So basically, just doing what I gotta do every time I step on the court and do what I gotta do.
Now, your drive time entertainment. Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, and Scott Ayers.
Go crazy, folks! Go crazy! It's a home run!
Man, woman, and child did that. Put them in the aisle. Johnny the Jet Rogers just tore them loose from their shoes.
You believe in miracles? Yes!
Comes to LeBron. He takes a fadeaway for the win. Hey! Knocked it down!
Here goes Davis. Oh, my God! Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
You can't believe what just happened! What a time to be alive!
Hit me with the horn, 20! Keep making noise! Keep making noise! Yeah! Oh, 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 oh! Here we go now! 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 Check it out!
Hey, welcome in to the Spill Sports Show live from Andersen Hall on the University of Nebraska campus. Thanks so much for joining us for your drive time sports talk fix here on a Thursday afternoon. Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, and Scott Ayers, pleased to be with you for another year, streaming live on krnu.unl.edu, podcasting on the spillkrnu.wordpress.com. And we will be on not just KRNU2 this year. We'll be spending some time over on 90.3. That's real physical airwaves, folks. But today, we've got a good show lined up for you. It's game week. Nebraska facing off against the Arkansas State Red Wolves this season in the highly anticipated season opener. Tanner Lee debuting at quarterback for the Huskers, and this new 3-4 defense that Bob Diaco came in as the new defensive coordinator to run. But here's the key question for this weekend. Will Nebraska even come out in a 3-4 defense against Arkansas State?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of people aren't expecting it. I don't think Bob Diaco wants to give too much away. Maybe it's just a little bit of compulsion, to him that he really doesn't want to give away his signature 3-4 defense, even though most of us know what a 3-4 defense looks like. He's going to want to save all of his bag of tricks for next week against an Oregon team that nobody really has any idea how good they are.
And I think the tough thing with this is, do you want your players to feel some sort of, feeling of being comfortable playing in a live game? Because there's a huge difference between practicing a 3-4 defense and practicing something and actually feeling it out in a game. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we see a few looks from time to time. Obviously, you don't want to sell the bag of tricks or whatever, but for me personally, I feel as though at least giving the guys some experience on the field might be beneficial. But at the end of the day, Diaco's the guy who's making millions of dollars coaching these guys up, and I am talking on a radio show. But just a little invoice on that.
The $825,000 a year man, that's Bob Diaco for you, and he is one of the most sought-after coaches for interviews in the state of Nebraska, highest-paid defensive coordinator in the country, and I'm excited to see that defense, but I really don't think we're going to see it until next week. I really think they're going to hold things back from Oregon, just try and not put anything on film, force Oregon to watch a little UConn or Notre Dame film and not give them an idea of the personnel and how that's going to go. But I think you also need to consider that this is a running quarterback in Justice Hansen. This is a guy who can give you some problems, and there's not a running quarterback on Nebraska's roster right now with the possible exception of Andy Bunch. So they haven't really gotten a look at a mobile quarterback, and how will it fare when they go down the road and they've missed an opportunity in a game to test out the new defense against a quarterback who can do more than one thing?
Keep in mind, too, that the Arkansas State quarterback's no scrub. He was actually pretty decently recruited coming out of high school good arm, good speed. But, Sky, I think brings up a good point that I thought about earlier in the week was those guys just need some game experience playing a 3-4 defense. And despite how you could be the best practice player ever, but that's really not the title you want to hold. You'd rather be the best game player, ready to go, ready to really test yourself. So I think they should at least do a quarter, maybe a half in the 3-4 defense, but maybe wait till they're up a couple touchdowns, assuming they get up a couple touchdowns and take care of business. But I'd be a little bit nervous if they don't run any 3-4 defense just because of the speed of Oregon and just playing it in a live game.
Yeah, and Arkansas State does like to run the football. They had over 1,000 rushing yards last season, and I think that 3-4 defense can really be a sturdy run-stopping team, and I think that's something we should look forward to in this game on Saturday is Nebraska being able to stop the run. So whether they are in a 4-3 or 3-4 defense, that's something that will be a positive for this Nebraska defense, at least against Arkansas State. But Arkansas State's offense is nowhere near what fans will see against Oregon, and I think that's just a given. But I do like the idea of giving the guys some on-field, in-game experience. At the end of the day, though, the guys have to come out and play because you can't look forward to Oregon, you can't look forward to Eugene because this is an Arkansas State team that does have a lot of talent. This is it's a tough and tight defensive unit, especially on that front four. Their safeties are young, but, Arkansas State defensively could give Nebraska some fits and troubles.
And we'll break down Arkansas State in the next segment with Scott Ayers' opponent preview. But I like what you brought up about the run defense because Mick Stoltenberg in the Monday press conference, the starting nose tackle for Nebraska, said without hesitation, answering a question on what his priority with this defense is, it's stopping the run. And he did not hesitate to say that at all. They really want to plug the gaps, and especially with a three-man front, that can, especially if you don't have the linebackers to do it, the run can really hurt you. And it's to the inside this time, not the outside. We've seen Nebraska in the past have a lot of trouble with outside runs, but will they get gashed up the inside this year? That's something to talk about as we move forward. Run defense, I don't think is going to be too much of an issue this weekend just because I don't think they have the experience running the football, a very, very inexperienced Arkansas State offensive line. But do you want to come out in a 4-3 and not show Oregon anything and risk a very close game or even perhaps losing to an Arkansas State team that's really loaded with 3 stars? This team won its last 7 or 8 games of the season last year. They won their last 8 games of the season last year. Perennial Sun Belt Conference champion and contender, and they play with Power 5 programs. You look at next week, they host Miami. This team is not afraid to play the big dogs, and I think they're going to show it on the field on Saturday.
Like I said, I think the casual fan that only really focuses on Nebraska is not going to really expect this Arkansas State team and how much talent they do have on the roster. But something that's worth noting about Mick Stoltenberg is he's gained 25 pounds in this offseason. I remember he said he was up to about 290 at the end of last season. He's up to 315. So if you want to stop the football, that's right there. If you want to stop the inside run, him taking up that much more space is a big, big key. So can he stay healthy, and how many plays can he play? DeAndre Thomas, we've heard a lot of rave reviews about from practice, but at the end of the day, still a freshman, hasn't played in a collegiate football game yet. So do you really want to throw him in that position if Stoltenberg gets hurt? So I think those are just a couple of keys for Nebraska, at least in the front 3, if you can initially slow down that first layer of run.
And like you said, Mick Stoltenberg up a lot of weight right now, anchoring the middle of that 3-4 defense and taking on triple teams in practice, double and triple teams. And this is a veteran offensive line, which brings me to my next question. Do you think this team is destined to be better in the trenches than last year?
Nebraska football, you're asking?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I do. I think this team is going to have a lot of grit up front, and both on offense and defensive side of the ball. And quite frankly, I love what we're hearing about Stoltenberg. But how about Freedom Akam? Oh gosh, I don't want to screw up his
Scotty
last name.
is back messing up the names. Akin Maladun.
Akin Maladu.
Freedom is what we'll call him.
Freedom, my guy Freedom. Such great improvement from Carlos Davis as well. And, you look up front, but how about these linebackers? They get another year of experience. Chris Webber, Dedrick Young. It's hard to believe that this team won't be more improved. Because you look back to last year's games against obviously Ohio State, which was, for any fan, a very brutal experience. Iowa, where Nebraska really, it felt like they were just ran all over. And then Tennessee, which was just a tough game, lots of injuries and suspensions. But this is an experienced defense. And I think from 2 years ago when this team finished 5-7 and really was giving up well over 400 yards a game to now, this will be the best defense we will see under Mike Riley.
And, David, we heard a lot about it in the spring, switching back to the offensive side of the football. We heard a lot about it in the spring. There were so many concerns about the offensive line, and Mike Riley wasn't shy about voicing those concerns. But in fall camp, they had probably the best fall camp of any unit on this team, and Mike Cavanaugh, who's really few and far between with praise.
On a very hot seat, I think we can all agree on right now, though. If there's any assistant coach that's going to get blamed this year, it's going to be Cavanaugh.
But he is usually very critical of his unit, but he has been hyping his guys up this fall camp, and we've seen it firsthand that they've looked pretty good, and the returners certainly looked the part. I mean, they lost the worst player, not even arguably the worst player, definitely the worst player on that offensive line. And this year, I think they go in with some more experience, a captain at left guard and Gerald Foster. Do you think this unit is destined to do some good things?
I think, well, Destin do some good things. If you're comparing it to itself from last year, then yeah, I think it's comfortable to say. But with the injury history on that line, and, you know, Dylan Utter may not have been fantastic or average or good or whatever. But at the end of the day, he had experience snapping the ball. And especially when you get in those game situations, that's something that Cole Conrad may struggle with, snapping it and getting up quickly in position, because he plays a lot of tackle and guard. It's a whole different ballgame to go from that to center. So I'm interested to see how the chemistry between him and Tanner Lee really develops over the course of the game. Nick Gates, I'm interested to see as well, because his confidence just died at the end of last year. It was shot. So I want to see him come out and dominate. And Gerald Foster, again, it's just another thing where I think we need to see more tape. He started in 2 career games, pretty nicely recruited, very highly rated from rivals. I believe he's a 4-star in the top 150.
Yep, 3 4-stars on this offensive line.
So at the end of the day, I think it comes down to game experience and the chemistry they have with one another. But something else I want to mention about the offensive line is Tommy Armstrong didn't get sacked a lot last year. That's why the sack numbers are so far down. But can they hold their own without letting the defensive line get into the pocket? Because Tanner Lee has a little bit of athleticism, but he's a guy who's been injured in the past, and he cannot take hit after hit that Tommy would have taken if he couldn't escape.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too. I know the sack numbers were down, but you got to give credit to Tommy Armstrong because he was tremendous rolling out. When it was thrown on the run, it's not necessarily tremendous, but when it came to escaping pressure and getting out of the pocket in a hurry, Tommy did a phenomenal job at that. And so it's interesting to see with Tanner Lee. He's more of a pocket passer, and I think that's one of the most fun unknowns going into this year is a quarterback that people have heard a lot about, have heard and followed a lot of the hype, but they haven't seen much. And maybe practice or highlights from his freshman year, but that's it.
And how will the offensive line adjust knowing that they don't have the quarterback that is able to escape that situation? So it'll be interesting to see in game how they'll adjust to that, or if they're more comfortable with it.
Right.
And that was one of the more interesting things to delve into with fall camp. How will those sack numbers change now that Tommy Armstrong is not there, the mobile quarterback who often escaped pressure? But I saw it from a different point of view, that pass protection, you need to dig a little bit deeper into those sack numbers. The hurry numbers were outrageous last year. Mm-hmm. Tommy Armstrong got hurried more than probably any other quarterback in the Big Ten outside of some of those really mediocre offensive linemen, or those mediocre offensive lines from the likes of Purdue and Illinois and Rutgers and some of those lesser squads. But there's something about the offensive line and the quarterback chemistry where if you know where your quarterback is going to be and he is in the place he's supposed to within the pocket, there's going to be fewer sacks, fewer confusion, fewer missing the gap on the offensive line. So if you're supposed to pinch, if you're supposed to release as a blocker, especially in pass pro, it's really good to know where your quarterback's going to be.
Yeah, it felt almost every time Tommy Armstrong snapped the ball, there was some sort of defender in the backfield. And I think that guys like David Neville, the senior, is going to really have to step up. and obviously the rest of these guys. And I think one of the nice things is that there is experience, and there's not a whole lot of youth. It's 4 juniors and a senior starting on this offensive line, and I think game experience is so crucial, but I think having that maturity, because there can be a huge difference between a 19-year-old kid and someone who's 21, 22 years old who has gone through those rigorous practices to be ready for this moment. But there's only so much that can be said about that.
And that's what I'm saying, too, is that's just the biggest question mark to me is it's either going to be a very good thing they know where the quarterback is or a very bad thing. Because there time after time, I question how technically sound some of these guys were. Because it seemed like right when the ball was snapped, somebody's already broken through the line. That was near the end of last year. I know they were injured and whatnot, but are these guys technically sound enough to stop elite pass rushers? Well, there's the end on Arkansas State that could break the Division I sack record this year.
Marlo.
30 and a half career sacks. And he's a odd body shape for a defensive end, but if you can get to the quarterback, Kavanaugh said best, it doesn't matter what level you are at. If you can get to the quarterback that much, you are doing something right, and you're going to play on Sundays. And that's something that really hope that Kavanaugh is really aiming for, is slowing him down.
And the offensive line gearing up to face that vaunted Arkansas State defensive line, which we'll talk about in the next segment, but it's all about who's behind them. And one guy hasn't quite stepped up for a certain position, a very high-profile position in Nebraska football, especially for the run-the-darn-ball guys that seem to be more vocal than most factions of fans. Running back. Nebraska doesn't have a starting running back right now. It's between 3, Trey Bryant, sophomore, or junior Divino Zigbo, or junior Mikhail Wilbon. And Jalen Bradley also not redshirting, the true freshman out of Bellevue West. So who takes that first snap at running back on Saturday evening?
Man, you two have been able to go to the practices a whole lot more, but it's so tough to think because all 3 of these guys had their shining star moments last season, and they also had moments that had you scratching your head. And so I think that this is going to be a backfield that is just switching off who's out there, I think, in this first game. And even against Oregon, I think the 3 are just going to be competing for drive after drive. But I think it's going to come down to Trey Bryant or Divina Zigbo. I love the power of Zigbo's running style, but that speed of Trey Bryant and his elusiveness and being able to get positive yardage on even broken plays is something that's special to see from that sophomore. But who knows? And I think that's just another exciting thing about this Husker offense, and you can be scared about it or looking forward to something new, is that this isn't Amir Abdullah, Rex Burkhead, where the job is secured and easy. New running backs, new quarterbacks, and a whole lot of questions.
I think it's going to be Trey Bryant. And I'm actually the minority here where I think running back is a position of concern for me, honestly, on this team, despite there being 3 potential starters. I think Mikhail Wilbon's easily a 3. I don't know about you two. I think Mikhail Wilbon's slightly below Trey Bryant and Divino Zigbo.
I'll get to that in a minute.
I think that Divino Zigbo, it'll be interesting to see when he comes out because just of the mystery of what happened last season. He was basically the starting running back for a while last season. All of the last, 5 games, they said he was injured with an ankle injury, but it was just kind of assumed that he really just was in the doghouse. And I'm still a fan of trying to get Jalen Bradley more in there at running back. After everything I've seen, I've been talking him up. One of my hottest preseason takes was by the end of the season, Jalen Bradley's going to be number 2 running back. He is that good. He is unlike the other 3. If he gets in space, he can do something special, and that's why he's on that kickoff return unit. But I think Trey Bryant out of the 3 is, to me, at least the easily the best running back if he can hold on to the football, which is an issue I have with him. But if he's figured that out, I think he has to start. But like I said, I think Mikhail Wilbon will maybe at 4 or 5 carries. I think Zigbo gets 9. I'll give Trey Bryant probably 14 if they run the ball that much.
It's hard to imagine that Jalen Bradley doesn't make at least some impact. I know Husker fans are very excited about him, and it's hard not to be. The guy has elite vision, and he showed that at Bellevue West, setting a Nebraska State high school record with 52 touchdowns in his senior season, which is absolutely staggering. But I'll tell you guys a little secret. I've heard rumblings that this Saturday, and these are unconfirmed rumors, but I've heard rumblings that this Saturday the starting running back will be Mikhail Wilbon.
I just can't believe
the
that.
junior. And he is he's easily the most explosive of the three backs, the fastest out in space, but there's concerns about him running in between the tackles. There's concerns about him in pass protection. And so the first carry on Saturday, at least from what I'm hearing, will go to Mikhail Wilbon.
Wow.
We'll see if that ends up holding true. I think he's a very good back, but I think you're right, David. I think Trey Bryant is the most complete back on this roster.
Yeah.
I think the concern with coaches, and especially Reggie Davis, is that Bryant missed quite a bit of fall camp. And I think that was the nightmare scenario because I think coaches were, I don't want to say hoping because coaches just want the best guy out there. But I think coaches were kind of looking for Trey Bryant to step in.
They wanted a reason to start him, basically. That's what they
and
wanted.
seize that role because he is their most complete back. And I think it's encouraging that Divine Ozigbo has put in a better offseason this year than he did last year. So a lot of good things could come of the running back position. Right now, I agree with you, David. It does look like a concern, but we'll see going down the road. I mean, do you think Trey Bryant is the guy eventually?
I think eventually he is, and he's young. He's a sophomore, and I think that he has a whole lot of room for potential and growth. David, I love the point you said, holding on to the football, and I think that just needs to be a concern for this backfield. I was rewatching highlights of different games, and just a glaring highlight, it was Mikhail Wilbon actually in the backfield against Oregon where there was a backward pass a little off the mark, and next thing you know, Oregon's running back the other way, 30 yards down the sideline. So just having good awareness, I think, is huge for these running backs. And I think Trey Bryant, just with everything that he's been gifted with, is going to be the guy. Unless there's some sort of injury, by the end of the season, he's going to be the one who has the most rushing yards for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's just it comes down to when you turn on the tape, who is the best running back? I think easily it's Trey Bryant out of the three.
Yeah.
I'm not as high on Divine Ozigbo and Mikhail Wilbon as other people. I think Wilbon is nice in certain situations, but he's not a guy that I'm going to want out there, fourth quarter, game on the line. I don't think Ozigbo is. Like I said, if Bryant just walked around campus with a football and had players try to hit it out of his arm, that would make a huge difference about his ball security. And I think that's something that maybe they should look to do. But if, like I said, he's the guy who can break the tackles. There are so many times where we just cringe because Ozigbo should have broken a tackle and broken off one. He's susceptible to the ankle tackles, and that's something Trey Bryant is not. How many times have we seen Trey Bryant just make some double juke backflip spiral move that I can't even pronounce or even ever see again? But he can do that, and he's a guy that can be pretty decent for this team. But like I said, it has depth, but how good is that depth actually? Is it because they're not good enough? It's a glaring question that I'm excited to see who can really step forward.
Well, we'll be looking to see which one of those three running backs does backflips on the field Saturday evening. And coming up next, we're going to take a look at Arkansas State, the opponent for Saturday night, returning Sun Belt champions, went 8-4 in the regular season last year, returning a pretty good squad, including quarterback Justice Hansen. Scott Ayers will give us the breakdown coming up next, right here on the Spill Sports Show. Stay with us.
Turn up the lights and young baby. You know what I mean. Want you to see everything. Want you to see all of the lights. I'm trying to tell you, but all I can say.
Back in studio, the Spill Sports Show, closing in on 3:58 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Happy you're joining us for your drive time here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, Scott Ayers with you, and turning our attention to Nebraska's weekend opponent as they prepare for the season opener against Arkansas State, reigning champions of the Sun Belt Conference. And Scotty, usually on our opponent preview, has the full breakdown of Arkansas State. So what are you noticing on the surface thoughts about the Red Wolves?
Well, how about this Red Wolf team that they finished winning 7 of their last 8 last season, and actually coming off a big bowl victory against UCF, controlled the entire game. And it's all because of head coach Blake Andersen, who's going into his 4th season. And this is a team that, on the surface, the first thing you notice is they get a lot of transfers from either JUCOs or other colleges. And I think that is one of the reasons why you see this Red Wolf team improve and have successful seasons, and they've won the Sun Belt Conference 4 out of the last 5 times. So it's a talented team that they actually played Nebraska in 2012, and Amir Abdullah and company really had their way against the Red Wolves, and it was a 42-13 victory, and with Nebraska piling up over 500 yards of offense. But that was 2012. A lot has happened since then. New coaches and a ton of new players along the way. So that's really the first thing you notice when you look at this team.
Another thing I want to say is that Arkansas State was 6th in sacks in Division I last season. So this is going to be a nice test for the biggest question, maybe the biggest question mark on this team, the offensive line, is how do they control the trenches? Can you get a running game established? Because the last thing I think Mike Riley and company want to do is give a guy who hasn't played a live action game for the past 2 years, make him throw for 300 yards just to beat them. So if they get the running game established, that's going to be good for Nebraska. Obviously, it takes a lot of pressure off Tanner Lee, who might be the most highly anticipated quarterback debut of all time, Nebraska history.
At least for a guy who hasn't played a Power 5 snap. I mean,
that's the crazy part,
he's going to get hit a few times. And he said Monday afternoon, it's been something like 640-some days since he has last taken a hit, and that last hit was against SMU his sophomore year. He broke his hand on the play, but it's been that long since he's taken a real hit in a real football game, and he might get a few with this Arkansas State defensive line. What kind of personnel do they have?
Well, obviously, I think the number one name you look at is Javon Roland Jones, and not only was he the Sun Belt Player of the Year, but he also led the team in sacks with 8 sacks last season, and he is someone who's going to give the Huskers absolute fits throughout the day. He's being looked at. He's a Bednarik Award watch list, and he's just a guy that is all day long going to give the Huskers fits. But not only that is the Alabama transfer D-liner, who also is someone on this
D-liner.
What a great defensive line name.
Yeah, he's a D-liner, baby. D-liner on that D-line. And those two, I think, are the 2 names you need to watch out for on this game on Saturday, Matt.
Liner suffered an injury in fall camp, but it did pull a groin, but he is expected to be back for this game,
right.
And according to the practice report, is active for Saturday night.
Yeah, and I think that you are going to see Nebraska have either Ozigbo, Wilbon, or Bryant in the backfield when Tanner drops back for a pass. Excuse me, gosh. And you're really going to see a lot of pass protection from them because you're going to need to double team these 2 studs on the offensive front.
Well, what a bounce back opportunity though for Nick Gates. I mean, the last time he was out there going against Derek Barnett, the all SEC, All-American defensive end from Tennessee, really lost a lot of confidence and then turns right around and plays one of the best players in the country in Javon Roland Jones. Could this be a huge bounce back for a guy that ESPN.com named to their All-Big Ten first team?
A hot take. This might define the season for Nick Gates because it sounds crazy, but just how badly he was devastated at the end of that Tennessee game, if that carries over into a new season, that's going to take him at least 3 to 4 or 5 games, like a couple back-to-back performances to get his mind right. He can talk the talk, but if you're not right up in the head, you're not going to be able to go out there and perform.
Well, that defensive line certainly something to watch for Arkansas State, but on the offensive side of the ball, a few more question marks. Very inexperienced offensive line, but a second-year starting quarterback, a quarterback that has gone 8-2 at Arkansas State, and that's Justice Hansen.
Justice Hansen, and he got the starting role after Arkansas State started off 0-4 on the season, thrown into a spot, and he ends up throwing for nearly 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, and really was a pivotal role in having a successful season for the Red Wolves. He can prove to be troublesome for a Nebraska defense, but like you said, this Arkansas State team, very inexperienced in their offensive line, all JUCO transfers, including a freshman center. So don't be surprised if Nebraska can really control the line defensively speaking, because it's an offensive line that hasn't proved much for the Red Wolves.
Justice Hansen, out of high school in the class of 2014, the 140th ranked player in the country, a pro-style quarterback, started off at Oklahoma and transferred to Arkansas State. And he's shown the ability to scoot a little bit, but really likes to spread it around to his wideouts.
Yeah, he does. You know, he's a guy that had 8 games of over 200 passing yards last season. He knows how to throw a good ball. And like you said, they have a lack of experience on the outside, but when we asked Bob Diaco a basic scouting report of this Arkansas State team, big, strong, athletic receivers, he described them as. So it'll be a nice test for, I know, Scotty's personal friend. He's known him for many, many years, and Eric Lee, newly black shirt Eric Lee.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, Eric Lee is going to have to deal with wide receiver Dijon Paschal, who was
that's so great.
Yeah, it's so good. Who was third team all Sun Belt last season and is really hoping to make strides as senior wideout. And I think it's a great test for Eric Lee, who's coming into a role where he's replacing Chris Jones due to injury, and it isn't going to be an easy first start for Lee, but I think it's something that will be manageable considering the fact that next week going against Oregon, those receivers are going to be a whole lot quicker and more talented.
What Dante Williams described as the 3 starting corners for Nebraska are a sophomore, and a redshirt freshman. So not a whole bunch of experience. Good players, good athletes in the Nebraska secondary, but they'll be out on some islands, and this will really be a proving ground for them against these big wide receivers on the outside. Justice Hansen likes to spread it around a little bit, and I think the 2 units that there are a lot of questions about for Nebraska outside of running back are going to get the biggest test in this game. Offensive line going against that vaunted defensive line, and the secondary, most notably the cornerbacks, going against a couple good X and Z receivers on those outside islands. We know about the safeties. We know about Josh Kalu and Aaron Williams, and we know that Nebraska's probably not going to get beat over the top much this year with guys that are as disciplined as that. However, when you put those corners out on an island, out routes, little slants, things like that can gash you on third down, it'll be interesting to see if these guys can step up to the challenge right away against a capable Arkansas State passing attack.
Yeah, and I think one other point of emphasis for this Arkansas State team that will be that really is a problem for them is their secondary. Arkansas State has only one returning safety in B.J. Edmond, and one of their only cornerback who really has been able to make moves is Blaze Taylor, who is a special team stud for Arkansas State. And that is actually something that Nebraska needs to be careful on. Caleb Lightbourne, who had struggled at times, if he gives Taylor any room to run, it could be a problem for Nebraska. Yeah.
Nebraska fans will also get to find out if Scott Booker is their best friend or their new worst enemy. So something to keep in mind is we'll see how good Lightbourne has improved over the offseason. But Sky mentioned Blaze Taylor has 781 career punt return yards, which is the second most in Sun Belt history and most in school history. So this is a team that they get room. They could get room to run.
Yeah.
And they fired the special teams coordinator, I believe, Bruce Reed last year. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting.
Long off-season.
Yeah, it was the long off-season. And something else is really miscellaneous note, but they also averaged 9.6 tackles for loss a game, which led the nation.
Yep.
So on top of the sacks, they know how to get behind the line on those toss plays and on those outside run plays. So combine that with a good special teams, These guys know how to make big plays, but they give up a lot of big plays.
And that's what I was going to say. If Tanner Lee has time to throw the football, Nebraska is going to rack up some serious yardage because of the lack of personnel or depth for this Arkansas State backfield.
And it's, there's something to consider. Arkansas State, at least historically, and kind of circling back to what Scotty talked about at the beginning of this program, they win a lot of Sun Belt titles, but they have had a lot of trouble in non-conference, which is why that bowl win over UCF, 31-13 in the 2016 Cure Bowl, was so big for the program because they have been so frustrated having trouble in non-conference. Like you mentioned, David, started 0-4 last year and really struggled to find themselves until they got into Sun Belt play. That's kind of the MO for Arkansas State. So how will they respond going in Memorial Stadium at night where Nebraska has won 19 straight home games? It's certainly something to look at. Also, David, you mentioned Scott Booker, who DeMornay Pearsonell, J.D. Spielman, and other players have said he has just injected energy into the special teams room. They got rid of Bruce Reed's $450,000 salary, and yes, you're doing the injection. You're doing the injection hand sign.
Sorry, I'm not Barry Bonds.
He really has, but he really has juiced up that special teams, to continue with our string of medical puns. He really has juiced up that special teams room, and the returners are going to be fast, electric. Obviously, the kick return, guys like Jalen Bradley, J.D. Spielman, Tyjon Lindsey back there, and then punt returns, one of the best he was a freshman All-American at punt return, back finally fully healthy for his senior year, DeMornay Pearsonell. But it's coverage that you got to look at, and coverages, and how are they going to do. Caleb Lightbourne has now been coached all offseason by defensive coordinator Bob Diaco, who is the punting coach. And I think we'll see Caleb Lightbourne take a big step.
I think so, too. I think Lightbourne is going to have one of the biggest steps out of any players from freshman to sophomore year. And he was thrown into a tough situation last year, thrown into a starting role that no one thought he'd be starting in. And so I think he had a lot of maturity over the summer, and when you have someone like Bob Diaco giving you advice all summer long, you're going to make improvements. So I don't think there should be any surprise if he is someone who is far better in terms of situational punting.
I have a big question mark about DeMornay. Just because of all the injuries, we can talk, all the media wants, fans can talk, but at the end of the day, this guy needs to find some way to produce. I know it's been a really long career for him, basically just sitting on the sidelines watching his team's successes, his team's disappointments, just everything. I mean, that must have just ate him up. So he needs to come out with a chip on his shoulder, but be very wary when a big play happens. I don't mean this to be funny, because we know he really injured his leg on a celebration of a touchdown. So I'm interested to see what happens if somebody scores and he's out there. I know. Again, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm being 100% serious, because that was a devastating injury. I mean, everyone just froze when that happened.
As someone who got stitches yesterday, I know something about stupid accidents, and that is one mistake I know DeMornay Pearsonell will not make again. But I think, David, we watched fall camp last year, and we watched fall camp this year, and it really does look like a different DeMornay Pearsonell. At least we haven't seen much in special teams, but at least in the in the passing game, it looks like a different DeMornay. He looks back to freshman speed, but with a wealth of knowledge of the playbook.
I was going to say, I think the biggest stride I've seen him make, because he's made strides a little bit, I think, in terms of just clean, sharp route running, which he didn't have 100% back last year because of his injury.
Right.
But I think his leadership is something that nobody's really talking about. Everyone's giving it to the vocal leader and Stanley Morgan. I'm not taking any away from Stanley Morgan Jr. because everyone respects him. One of my favorite players. But DeMornay, just the way he carries himself, he has the receiving corps' respect, and he has Keith Williams' respect for all the strides and how hard he's worked to get back. Into this, basically to come back as a primary target for Tanner Lee and for Nebraska to try to play around him and get the ball to him in space. So I'm happy that he's made strides in terms of when he can't be on the field. He's made a lot of maturity strides, and that's something that I think is going to pay dividends in the long run.
We'll talk later this hour on Nebraska's drought at 1,000-yard receivers. It's been a 127-year drought. That's from the beginning of Nebraska football. They have never had a 1,000-yard receiver. Could this be the year with Tanner Lee? That coming up later this hour. But the big news of last weekend was not college football, even though there was a few games on the table. The big news of last weekend was a little mega fight in Las Vegas. And we'll talk about that coming up next. Conor McGregor falling to Floyd Mayweather, but it was more entertaining than we expected. We'll tell you what's next for Conor McGregor coming up next right here on the Spill Sports Show. Stay with us. Back here on the Spill Sports Show, 4:15 in the afternoon on your drive time Thursday. Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, Scott Ayers, pleased to be with you and recapping a little bit of last weekend's events. It was a great fight, and it was something definitely worth the watch, worth the $100 to a whole bunch of people. I was hearing something around 5 million pay-per-view subscriptions. Floyd Mayweather
they
and Conor
netted
McGregor,
over $680 million.
They drive the money for sure. And Floyd Mayweather defeating Conor McGregor in 10 rounds by TKO. And so really the storyline I want to go with here is Conor McGregor proved he belonged in that fight. So where does he go from here? What do you think's the next step for McGregor?
Floyd Money Mayweather 2.0 is going to be Conor McGregor for the rest of his career because McGregor is going to make some major bucks going into the rest of his career. I think he showed himself very, very well. I think I wasn't surprised. I actually picked McGregor to win the fight, and I've been talking him up this entire time because he's just that skilled of a fighter, and he's just got that heart of a champ. He does. He has a fighter's mentality. He feels like he can take out anyone. And I thought he represented him and his country very, very well. But Floyd, I have some questionable words about Floyd, but
we're sticking just with the fight. Just with the fight.
He played the same game he always does. Very defensive, very tactical. I would have liked to see him throw a little bit more punches in the first couple rounds, but he just did what he did. He let Conor McGregor punch himself out, and then he just came in with a couple right hooks, a couple uppercuts, just wore out McGregor.
Conor McGregor landed 111 punches on Floyd. There's fighters, a lot of fighters that have fought Floyd Mayweather that haven't landed that in 12 rounds, much less 10.
Pacquiao didn't. And I think in this fight, at least from my perspective, it was evident that McGregor knew he had to win early if he wanted to win that fight. Because the first 3 rounds was all McGregor going all out, and by round 6 and 7, the energy had depleted, and at that point, if you were watching the fight, you knew Mayweather was going to win. Unless some freak punch connected and knocked him out, Mayweather was going to win that fight. And I think by the 10th round, it was over. And you saw that because McGregor was really falling back. He was really retreating, and that's when you saw Mayweather really strike, and that was all she wrote for that fight. But it was tremendous to watch. McGregor did a phenomenal job, and Mayweather said he had to change up his tactics a couple of times because he wasn't expecting that from McGregor and his awkward stance. But
he had a UFC stance that entire fight, and that's something that he's just very, very comfortable with. Something that I have a little bit grievance about is I loved what McGregor said at the end. He said, it's a fighter mentality. It's that champion mentality. He said, I was tired, but let him knock me out. He would have much rather been knocked to the floor than get stopped because the referee was afraid of him getting hurt. So I think it was stopped too early. At 99.99% chance it wouldn't have changed anything. But I think that McGregor would be much happier. He's happy with $100 million. He can do whatever he wants. He can buy anything he ever won. But from just a fighting standpoint and just a sports standpoint, he would have liked to see himself get knocked out rather than just get the fight called off. So I would have liked to see that personally.
And I think a lot of us would have, enjoyed seeing that end in a more ceremonious way. But the final barrage that Floyd put on Conor McGregor was staggering. And he had him up against the ropes. He was right hook, left hook, uppercut, right hook, and then right hook again. And McGregor was staggering in the 9th round. It went to the 10th round, and Robert Byrd, usually a more conservative referee in the sport of boxing, ended it right there. And it was over, I believe, at that point. But drawing back a little bit and looking at those earlier rounds, McGregor landed an uppercut in the 3rd round. The 4th round is where Floyd really started to take over. But that 3rd round was interesting because Conor landed an uppercut on Floyd's chin.
Floyd couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that really staggered Mayweather back and said, wow, all right, this is a fight.
He respected him at the end. I feel like Mayweather was kind of joking. I mean, McGregor was toying with him the first round too. After landing a couple punches, he put both of his arms behind his back and put his face out, just like, hit me, I dare you. But I think McGregor earned a lot of respect from a lot of people during that fight. But Scotty, I think you brought up a good point. McGregor knew he had to win early. Yeah. The only reason why, again, I say it shouldn't have stopped is I can't remember who Pacquiao was facing. It's horrible because the other guy won. But it was the mid-9th round, and Pacquiao's opponent was bleeding. I mean, a lot. And he made it through the end of the round. The referee said, okay, you guys show me something or I'm stopping this fight. The other fighter came out in a vengeance, and he ended up winning the fight by decision. A lot of people said
Timothy Bradley.
A lot of people said it was rigged, but the result stayed. He won. So it's hard for me to put it past Conor that he could have done something similar. He wouldn't have won a decision. We can all agree. He would never have won in a decision. But if he could have gotten 2 big counter hits right at the end, I mean, you never know.
I think the tough thing was there was still, I think, a minute 30, minute 40 left.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with
that. And when they called the fight, McGregor was stumbling. And I think that Mayweather, unless McGregor was able to counter, Mayweather would have just brought the heat.
I'm not disagreeing with
that. If McGregor survives that round, sure, I think anything can happen. Maybe he gets that vengeance, but I think Mayweather would have knocked him out cold if that fight continues.
Nothing taking away from Conor in boxing, but I think we still all agree that he is without a doubt the baddest man in UFC.
Oh, easily.
So does he go back to UFC after this, or does he cash in on the boxing paycheck?
The only thing that would stop him, I think he'd rather go to boxing for the standpoint of, do you know how much more money he could make in boxing than UFC? He never made more than $20 million in a fight in UFC. Made $100 million boxing. Right, the whole issue is this would be a giant lawsuit against Dana White and trying to get out of that contract. Dana White isn't letting the baddest man in UFC go. He's not going to do it.
I mean, I think he didn't he already retire from UFC for the boxing fight?
I mean, not really.
I don't know if he's under contract
came out of retirement.
with UFC right now.
He came. Yes, he still is because he came back. He retired to get his way, and then he came back a week later when everyone on Twitter exploded and everyone was freaked out about it. It was a fake retirement, and most people kind of saw that after a couple minutes. But I think he'd do a mix because I still think his heart is in UFC, and that's something he enjoys doing much more than boxing.
I think so too, and I think Conor could be a good boxer, but there's one up-and-coming boxer from right here in Nebraska that really looks like the next big name in boxing. And do you think Bud Crawford has that kind of potential? Because in an undefeated I think it was junior welterweight undefeated bout, knockout with an ab punch. That is
a liver punch, wasn't it?
Some sort of midsection punch. It wasn't even a head punch. It was a knockout on that kind of midsection punch. That is impressive and incredible. Do you think he carries that to boxing fame?
Man, that is something that is incredible, and I doubt we ever see a Crawford Mayweather fight. And if we do,
Mayweather's done.
We'll sell out PBA, baby. Maybe have it in Memorial Stadium.
You asked if he was the next big thing in boxing. How many losses does he have? What's that number, Matt?
That number is 0.
Okay, exactly. That explains it enough. Yeah, he is. Everyone knows who he is. Most boxing people know who he is and his dominance. And the fact that was in the 3rd round that liver punch happened and he knocked him out. I couldn't believe it. I had to rewatch that about 4 times because I didn't understand how he got knocked out.
Yep.
They had to do a super zoom in. You see his body just converge in a way that I didn't even know was possible, even if you were turning into like a giant blob. I just have never seen anything like
Megatron.
that. Or Megatron.
And I think he did, looking at it from a sports business standpoint and a promotional standpoint, I think he did the right thing in signing with ESPN instead of Showtime. How do you grow your name? You stick on cable, may not be as much money, but you stick on cable, you stick with high visibility, and the worldwide leader is going to hype you up if you're their
love
guy.
it. Like, no, everyone loves it. Even, like, people don't watch boxing. They're like, okay, I like having big fights on free cable TV. They will tune in. And there's still a lot of money to be made the bigger it gets.
And that's good publicity for the state, good publicity for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Obviously, he is a Husker fan, but very impressive in that fight at PBA. It was a nationally televised fight, brought in a lot of people here, and he could be the next thing in boxing. Well, coming up next hour, or I guess next segment, since we're on a mid-hour schedule, we are heading into our next segment, talking about Nebraska and the 1,000-yard receiver dilemma. But David Eickholt leaves us for now, and he will be back next week.
31-20 Nebraska.
He and I will be on the Catalyst pregame show Saturday afternoon starting at 4:45. That'll lead you into Husker Countdown on KRNU, and our live broadcast of the game featuring Zach Penrice and Austin Orman on the call of Nebraska versus Arkansas State. So we'll talk a little bit more Nebraska football coming up next, right here on the Spill Sports Show. Stay with us.
Let's go. Let's get it cranked up.
The Spill Sports Show with Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, and Scott Ayers. Never miss a show again. Check out our podcast at thespillkrnu.wordpress.com.
The 76ers could have drastically improved their organization by drafting Walter Pitchford.
Quite frankly, if he wins a Super Bowl, I'll direct it 30 for 30 on it.
I've watched this kid play multiple times on national television.
You like watching kids, David?
Dude, I love basketball. Excuse me.
The Spill Sports Show. Thursday drive time from 3 to 5 on KRNU.
Back here live in studio. It is 4:29 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Happy to be with you for Drive Time Radio on this Thursday. Matt Reynoldson, Scott Ayers, David Eickholt just stepped out of the booth to get to football practice, but we're talking a little bit more about Nebraska football in this segment, talking about the chance for a 1,000-yard receiver for the first time in school history. And Scotty, how has it been 127 years of football without a 1,000-yard receiver?
Man, and I think you look at the stats, Kenny Bell is one of the most well-acclaimed receivers in Nebraska football history, and he is not on an NFL roster. So I think that you look at those kind of things, that Nebraska has really transitioned from a running style to a passing style in the last, decade or so. And even then, it was Taylor Martinez, but he was running the football a lot. Tommy Armstrong, still a huge running presence. And because of that, the ball gets spread out a whole lot more. And so very talented receivers like Jordan Westernkamp, not 1,000 yards. Quincy Enunwa, never 1,000 yards. Kenny Bell, never 1,000 yards. And because of that, that's why you see this stat. You see the stat that Nebraska has never had someone over 1,000 yards receiving.
Well, that's crazy. The only receiver ever to be drafted number one was Irving Fryer back in 1983 or 84, I believe, and he was taking passes from Turner Gill. Obviously, had an illustrious NFL career and was taken number one overall in the NFL draft. Never had a 1,000-yard season at Nebraska. I know they went option for a long time, but I mean it's hard to believe guys like Johnny Rodgers. I mean, obviously with Jerry Tagge running the option, running the wishbone, things like that. But Tagge was a good quarterback. Johnny Rodgers was a great receiver. Guys like that, icons in Husker lore. I mean, one of the all-time leading receivers, Nate Swift, with former Big 12 Player of the Year, Zach Taylor. Never went over 1,000 yards,
Never.
But maybe Tanner Lee is the first quarterback to have a 1,000-yard Nebraska receiver. Do you think that happens this year?
Ooh, man, I think that's tough because there's only really one or two names, receivers, that I see go over 1,000 yards, and that's Stanley Morgan Jr., and it's actually the redshirt freshman, J.D. Spielman. I think that those two are the names that you need to watch out for in terms of 1,000-yard receivers. And I don't think DeMornay Pearsonell's a bad receiver by any means, but he's your deep threat guy or the screen pass receiver that can give you big plays, but I don't know how often you'll see him catching slants over the middle and having huge over 100-yard receiving days. Stanley Morgan Jr., on the other hand, someone who's been so experienced and, was kind of quiet last season, but I think that if there's anyone on this roster who can get that 1,000-yard season, it's Stanley Morgan Jr.
Stanley Morgan at that X-receiver spot, and not really a huge guy, but plays like a big-bodied wide receiver. His backup, Brian Reimers, 6'5", obviously a big-bodied wide receiver, and really the only one they have on this roster. But Morgan, great for outs, great for little jump balls. That third down guy and that guy you want there obviously can make the big play, hit some home runs. But I think DeMornay Pearsonell, like you said, becomes that big play guy this year. Slants over the middle. He's become a sharper route runner, become a more heady player, and really absorbed that playbook. And that's why he's starting over a top 100 player and a former 5-star in Tyjon Lindsey. It wasn't when the final rankings were released, but was a 5-star at one point before his injury last year. True freshman Tyjon Lindsey, I think over anybody else on the roster, if Tyjon Lindsey was like a slot man or something like that, he'd be starting.
Yep.
But DeMornay Pearsonell on the outside, a senior, the lone senior in this starting wide receiver group, really in the top 6, because if you look at other seniors, you got guys like Brett Clausen and Gabe Ron, but really in this top 6, the only senior in this group. So DeMornay Pearsonell, I think, has a really good chance to have his breakout year this year and be a special wideout.
I think so too. And Tyjon Lindsey is someone that I don't think is a 1,000-yard receiver this season, but in the next 3 seasons, him and J.D. Spielman, what a tremendous group those two can be for the years to come for Husker football. And if Tanner Lee stays both years, I mean, you could see some serious numbers from all 3 of those players. And I mean, Tristan Gebbia or even Patrick O'Brien, one of those two, whoever takes a role after Lee. I mean, there's so much talent at the quarterback position that these receivers who are also young and have bright futures ahead of them, as a Husker fan, you can't be surprised if this 1,000-yard record or receiving yards can finally be broken.
And I think, I know recruiting is not really your bread and butter, but
right.
I think this is something to show this year with a quarterback like Tanner Lee and wideouts who can make it happen, like Stanley Morgan Jr. and DeMornay Pearsonell, as well as a true freshman in Tyjon Lindsey. There's spots open on this roster right away if you want to come in and contribute. And there are quarterbacks who will spread the ball around. This weekend they have 4-star top 100 wide receiver visiting. You look at the guys who they have shots left with and the guys who they have committed to this class. 4-star wide receiver.
Jr. is coming back.
He will come back, it looks like right now. And 4-star wide receiver Joshua Moore committed in this class. 3-star wideout from St. Louis probably will end up jumping to a 4-star, Cameron Brown. And then they got shots with guys like 5-star Jalen Hall, 4-star 6'5", runs a 4.4 Tommy Bush. From Ontario, 4-star Michael Ezeki. So, you got guys that'll turn into those big-bodied wide receiver threats, but how about a guy who plays like he has a big body and one of the smallest guys in the field? I saw in practice a couple Thursdays ago, we were watching practice, and Tanner Lee threw up a jump ball on a fly route to Tyjon Lindsey, going up against double coverage, 2 taller D-backs. 5'9", Tyjon Lindsey skies up and picks that ball out of the air. He is going to be a special player.
And he's someone, too, that Mike Riley and company says that he will get playing time this year. And so whether it is on kickoff or punts or in receiving from Tanner Lee, I think that he is a special threat that I think Nebraska is very thankful they got him because he was the player, right, who was looking at Ohio State and chose Nebraska, correct?
He was committed to Ohio
That's
State.
That's right, and he decommitted.
That's
right.
In January, yes.
That's right. That's a huge commitment for Nebraska because it adds a lot of depth for this season, but not only that, gives a bright future for a group that has never been illustrious. I don't think you can ever look back at, Johnny Rodgers fantastic. And
Heisman winner.
Heisman winner, absolutely.
But more of his ability, running
as
the ball,
a run,
some screen passes,
exactly.
In wishbone type formations, and as a punt returner, that glorious punt return in the game of the century against Oklahoma. A highlight that'll be played forever in Husker lore. But again, not a 1,000-yard receiver. Irving Fryer, not a 1,000-yard receiver. Guys from this century: Nate Swift, Jordan Westerkamp, Kenny Bell,
Quincy Enunwa,
never. Maurice Purify. Guys that have made a name for themselves. Quincy Enunwa
was the Jets' number 1 guy until he got hurt.
Yeah, the number 1 wide receiver for the New York Jets, who are probably going 0-16 this year.
Yeah.
But these are guys that can catch the football, who can run, who are athletic. And there's never been a guy go for 1,000 yards.
Never.
Because there hasn't been quarterbacks that have thrown for that many yards. And I think it's a lot of people are safely assuming that Lee will pretty much shatter the passing records in Husker history.
Well, and that's just it. The fact that Martinez and Armstrong are 2 of the highest record holders for Nebraska football says a lot, because Nebraska football has had great quarterbacks, but they've never been passing quarterbacks. Eric Crouch is a phenomenal example. Tommy Frazier. And so you look at those quarterbacks and you compare them to Tanner Lee, and it's just 2 completely different types of players. And so what Tanner Lee brings to the table is something I don't think Husker fans have really seen. A pocket passer who's aggressive but knows how to make the right plays. And I think that's what's going to be so special about this season, that, yeah, it's an inexperienced group of receivers, but with that being said, DeMornay Pearsonell, Stanley Morgan, and J.D. Spielman, these 3 guys are all have great potential to have phenomenal seasons.
Do you think, here's another question. I mean, we're looking at 1,000-yard receivers, but do you think Tanner Lee has a shot to break this passing yardage for a single season set by Joe Gans in 2008 with 3,568 yards? The current over-under by Bovada and JP and all the major Las Vegas sports books is 2,999 and a half. So over or under that for Tanner Lee. I mean, injuries kind of cloud that, but I think it's very, very safe to bet the over.
I was about to say, if he stays healthy, how do you not bet the over?
Right.
It's so hard to imagine, because knowing Mike Riley's style of offense and who Tanner Lee is as a player, you're not going to see him scrambling on what should be a pass play, and it's a broken play and he scrambles for 7 yards. And you're not going to see him have designed quarterback draws. You're going to see a whole lot more pass plays coming from the quarterback position, and Tanner Lee is the right guy for that job. So not only do I see him go over 3,000 passing yards, but definitely a strong possibility to break that record. It just depends, how often and how comfortable Mike Riley and company feel about him passing the ball 30, 40 times a game.
The hype train has been real for Tanner Lee, seeing a lot of NFL scouts project him as a first-round draft pick next year. Certainly could happen. I heard that first from Billy Devaney. He spoke to one of my classes last year, and it was very evident that Billy Devaney very high on this guy, and that's a former NFL GM, high on Tanner Lee. He has the body, he has the frame, he has the footwork, and he has the mental side of things. Third-year captain. He was a freshman captain at Tulane, a sophomore captain at Tulane, and now he's a junior captain at Nebraska, heading into his first start, and the first hit he'll take in about over 640 days. That's about 2 seasons of football since he last took a hit, and Tanner Lee already earning the respect of his teammates.
And I think that shows a lot about his character as a player. To be a captain your freshman year of college, be a captain now into a team that's completely new, And I know he was here last year and all that, but he's just taking the reins now. But I think his football IQ is just phenomenal. And say what you will about Tommy, who was able to just be a master escape artist. He didn't make the right decisions at times. And just from practice and what everyone is saying, Tanner Lee obviously is still going to have mistakes. There's no such thing as a perfect quarterback, but it's going to be far less than what we saw from Tommy Armstrong. And I think Husker fans should be excited about that.
And Tanner, does rely on his arm strength, tries to fit balls in tight windows, but we also have seen a very opportunistic defense in fall camp. And so I think it's hard to judge Lee by what we've seen so far, but what we have seen is a great passer, one who makes heady decisions, and I think one who is a very safe bet to break another passing record in the Nebraska record books. I believe he'll shatter Zach Taylor's passing touchdown record of 26.
Oh, yeah, I think, and I think it all comes down to how he sets the tone in this first game. And I think there's going to be times where he struggles. I think Wisconsin, even though they've lost their 2-star linebackers, that's definitely going to be a tough physical defensive game. But, I mean, there is so much potential for him to break that record. And I think it starts on Saturday. Don't be surprised if he has 3 or 4 passing touchdowns.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there's a possibility of Nebraska, after going, like we've said, like we have harped on in this segment, 127 years without a 1,000-yard receiver, do you think there's a chance Nebraska gets 2 this year?
2 1,000-yard receivers? I think there's obviously a chance, but I don't want to say yes to that just because it's been so tough for this Husker team to break that record. I think DeMornay Pearsonell and Stanley Morgan are 2 guys that
Tyler Hoppus also at the tight end position, and
right.
they will go big sets. On the depth chart, they do have 2 tight end slots right there. Starting tight ends are Connor Ketter and Tyler Hoppus. So you look at Tyler Hoppus as a guy who could maybe break that record too.
And I think the tough thing is, if Cethan Carter is here, I think I say yes, because I think Cethan Carter was injured last year, but maybe one of the more underutilized players on that Husker roster last season.
In this century, really.
Yeah.
It looks like.
What a mistake, because now he's with the Cincinnati Bengals, and sure, he's going to be starting off down on the depth chart, but don't be surprised if he's making moves this season as a rookie in the NFL. And I think Mike Riley and company will probably be kicking themselves because he was a phenomenal player.
Well, I don't think it was about them. I think it was about the quarterback.
I think so, too. And I think you look back at films, and there are so many just passes just off the mark, just out of reach, thrown too low, and Carter would keep plays alive at times. And I think if that's the toughest part is these tight ends don't necessarily have nearly the experience that you would want going with a new quarterback. But, Cethan Carter, if he's on this roster, come on, that's another 1,000 receiving yards right there.
I'll call my shot right now. I say Stanley Morgan is Nebraska's first 1,000-yard receiver in school history. What say you?
I'm going to go Stanley Morgan as well. I think that just by watching how well he has done in his first 2 years, and he is now the prominent number 1 receiver, he's going to be going up against the best cornerbacks at times in the country, but I think it's very doable for Stanley Morgan, especially if this is the passing offense that everyone has been hyping it up to be.
Well, the Kansas City Royals broke a 45-inning scoreless streak the other night. We'll talk about that a little bit next as we transition to our MLB playoff preview, or more so September preview as we gear up toward the end of the MLB season. We'll talk about that a little bit next, and we'll close with our final thoughts in the rundown. This is the Spill Sports Show. Stay with us for the dramatic conclusion. Back here in KRNU Studios at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It is 4:48 p.m. on your drive time Thursday. Happy to be with you on the Spill Sports Show. Matt Reynoldson and Scott Ayers. David Eickholt is out at football practice, but talking a little bit of postseason baseball, or at least looking ahead to postseason baseball. Things shaping up well for teams like the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Houston Astros, but not so well for the Kansas City Royals. 45 scoreless innings before that streak was broken, now sitting in 7th place in the wild card standings, tied with Seattle, but only 4.5 games back. They had a month to make it up. Can they do it?
And I think the tough thing is both Seattle and Kansas City a month ago were competing either half game up, out, or actually in the wild card spot, but both have struggled as of late, and I think Kansas City can do it. The question is, are they going to? I don't think so, unfortunately. I think that, these struggles, they can have a lasting effect, and they were able to get a win a couple nights ago, but it's just so hard to see, and I think the Twins are playing such great baseball right now, and but you never know, and that's a fun thing about September. The New York Yankees have struggled. Their rookies are finally coming back to earth. Aaron Judge has not been playing good baseball, but for me, I don't think Kansas City's the team who gets in. I think that L.A. just made a big move to get Upton and improve their outfield a whole lot more, and so I think that really it'll come down to the Yankees, Twins, Angels, or Orioles, and so I think that's what you'll see in the East or in the American League.
It is unfortunate because the Royals pretty much bet the farm on their postseason hopes, getting Melky Cabrera and guys like that, difference makers on their roster. So unfortunate as a Royals fan to see that, but
yeah,
that's baseball, and that's what they always say. Another local team of local interest is the Chicago Cubs, and now 3.5 games up in the NL Central. They looked like they were struggling for a while. We're a 500 team at the All-Star break, but now a comfortable lead over Milwaukee in the Central, and kind of a down year for the Central. St. Louis at 500, Pittsburgh well below 500, and the Cincinnati Reds just being the Cincinnati Reds
you got
down
that right.
there at 53 and 77, or 57 and 77, excuse me. And so the Chicago Cubs look like a safe bet for the playoffs, but can anybody stop the Los Angeles Dodgers in the NL?
Well, here's the tough thing about the National League right now is that the only team I see really stopping the Dodgers are the Washington Nationals. And right now, Arizona has been playing great baseball against the Dodgers, currently up 8-1, but if they hold on to that game, it's another series win for the Diamondbacks against the Dodgers. So I think the Diamondbacks might have enough pitching to compete with the Dodgers. The problem with the Nationals is they've dealt with so many injuries, obviously Bryce Harper being the most recent. And so with the injuries to the Nationals and not knowing if Arizona can really keep up, the Dodgers right now have to be a favorite to at least make it to the World Series. The thing is with the Dodgers, the last few years, they've also been predicted to make it that far, and they have fallen short.
91-40 currently, and the best pitcher in baseball, in my opinion, Clayton Kershaw. A lot of people's opinion. It's a very popular one. But, I mean, you look at the wild card teams in the National League, your Colorado Rockies and the Arizona Diamondbacks, that NL West is so
fierce,
strong out there. And Arizona, I mean, they go out on the road and win series. Just a couple weeks ago, they beat the Chicago Cubs at Wrigley, and that was when the Cubs were playing well. The Cubs ended up beating the Nationals in a weekend series that weekend, and so Cubs are playing well right now, but the Diamondbacks just know how to win in places. Do you think they can make a little noise in the playoffs?
I think so, and a couple weeks ago, Diamondbacks are a half game of the Rockies and now hold a 3-game lead over the Rockies and have a 6-game lead over the Brewers. And the problem is Arizona, if they win that wild card game, they have to be thrown into a series right away against the LA Dodgers. And that is no small task. But if there's any wild card team who can keep up with the Dodgers, it's the Diamondbacks. It can't be the Brewers, it won't be the Rockies, and it certainly won't be the Cardinals. And the only other chance is if the Brewers somehow win the Central and the Cubbies get thrown down to that wild card spot. I see only the Diamondbacks or the Cubs being the two teams in that first series that can compete with the Dodgers.
Well, a little different story in the American League, as the top three have definitely separated themselves from the wild card conversation, really. I mean, Arizona has a better record than one of the division leaders, Chicago, in the NL, but in the AL, these three division leaders have completely separated themselves from the pack, and that's Houston, Boston, and Cleveland. Which of those three teams do you think has the best shot of making a run at a World Series?
Man, I love what the Boston Red Sox are doing, but it is so hard not to choose the Houston Astros. All season long, they have played consistent, strong baseball, and you look at a guy like Jose Altuve, who's batting .355 on the season, but really has been a catalyst for this team, and there's a reason why he's in talks for winning an MVP. And I think that's why the Astros are a team that will give so many people fits. And I think the Cleveland Indians, there was an article posted by ESPN today saying that they're also a threat at a World Series run, and they're a team that struggled early on, were mediocre at the All-Star break, but now have turned it up a notch, and with 20 games over 500, another great ball club. So all three of those teams are great, but my pick is going to be the Houston Astros.
I got to disagree with you here, Scotty, and it's for one key reason. The team that is by far the record trailer in the American League, the Chicago White Sox, I witnessed them sweep the Houston Astros in Chicago on the south side at the great Guaranteed Rate Field where a whole 5 fans were in the stadium. But I watched that, and the Sox and their young talent, there is young talent
Tim Anderson,
on that
great
roster.
shortstop.
Yohan Moncada,
Yep.
they've got some pieces, but by no means should they be sweeping the American League record leader. And for that reason, I just think they are they're too wishy-washy for me. I think Boston, like you mentioned, is a very good team, but I think Cleveland's right now got to be the odds-on favorite to get back to the World Series.
And why is that?
I just think that good question. They've got the pitching, and they've got consistent bats. They play small ball really well, and I think if you keep the line moving, obviously as a Royals fan, that is my preferred philosophy of baseball, but if you keep the line moving, good things are going to happen. Scotty, do you have a rant prepared?
Oh, I always have one for this, Matty Ice. It's the final rundown.
Good to be back on the final segment of the Spill Sports Show. Been a long time since we've sang that little jingle. But
it's been too long.
Back in full force, the final rundown is where each host gets a 30-second rant on any given topic, and the other host has a 30-second rebuttal. It's crunch time, and Scotty, you're on the clock.
Alrighty, well, let's stay in baseball. The Colorado Rockies are back, baby. And when I say that, they're back to struggling when they need to be successful. And that is Colorado baseball at its finest. Pitching has gone out the window. The bats, they said no more. And because of that, they continue to lose series after series. They lose to the Royals in a series, the Brewers, Braves, and Marlins. All of their last 5 series, they have lost every single one of them. And because of that, they're beginning to slip, only 3 games ahead of the Brewers. The bats have gone cold, and guys like Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado are doing everything they can to keep that team afloat. However, I don't think it's going to be enough. I don't see the Colorado Rockies making the playoffs.
I will have to disagree with you there. I think the Colorado Rockies, and you with the fist pump there as a Rockies fan, I think the bats are guaranteed to turn back on. Yes, they've struggled throughout the season, and the pitching has struggled, and I think pitching will end up going out the window as usual for the Rockies.
Colorado baseball, baby.
This usually happens in May, but this time happening in September. But I think these bats have really got a chance to turn it on, and it's been impressive to see the run output for the Rockies this season, and that's why they're even in the wild card conversation right now.
Yeah, and Matt, you're on the clock.
Well, Roger Federer, the best tennis player of, I believe, all time, and certainly the leader in Grand Slams, was just hanging out playing tennis in Central Park during the U.S. Open on one of his off days, one of his training days. And how cool is that to see one of the best athletes in the world and one of the most iconic celebrities in sports just out hitting balls in a park, in Central Park, just these recreational tennis courts. That's just so cool to see, and it's cool to see athletes engage with the fans. And I think that really means a lot more here in 2017 when things are so visible with social media. I think more athletes need to start engaging with fans and being on a human level, because I think we prop these athletes up to be a different type of being. And I think when they bring themselves down to that human level, it makes all athletes a lot more likable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And Roger Federer, he's one of those guys that, he's been talked about since growing up, I remember there was a Gillette Fusion commercial, probably in 07 or 08. Tiger Woods and Roger Federer were the studs, and they were joking around, laughing in the commercial. And how about now, 10 years later, the guy is still kicking butt, playing tennis, and not only that, but he's so looked up to and is so smart with his image and represents himself in just a great manner and fashion. So, Roger Federer, great guy.
Well, that's all the time we have today as we close in on 5 o'clock in your drive time. You're listening to the Spill Sports Show. We thank you all so much for joining us, and you can check out our podcast on the spillkrnu.wordpress.com. That should be up in about an hour and a half. And make sure to tune in to KRNU Kickoff, a new pregame show from the Haymarket. David Eickholt and myself will be down at Catalyst, a Union Bank building, down in the Haymarket, starting at 4:45, 2 hours and 15 minutes before kickoff on Saturday afternoon, leading into Husker Countdown and Zach Penrice and Austin Orman's call of Nebraska versus Arkansas State. For David Eickholt and Scott Ayers, I'm Matt Reynoldson. Have a great weekend and drive safe out there.
Sports Show with Matt Reynoldson, David Eickholt, and Scott Ayers. Never miss a show again. Check out our podcast at thespillkrnu.wordpress.com.
The 76ers could have drastically improved their organization by drafting Walter Pitchford.
Quite frankly, if he wins a Super Bowl, I'll direct it 30 for 30 on it.
I've watched this kid play multiple times on national television.
You like watching kids, David?
Dude, I love basketball. Excuse me.
The Spill Sports Show. Thursday drive time from 3 to 5 on KRNU.